Creating removable scenery can be a great way to provide access to hidden trackage or to get yourself out of a design bind. Please join me in looking at a whole bunch of ways that I've used removable scenery on my HO scale Burrlington Northern layout located in Seattle, Washington, and including both standard and narrow gauge trains. I got started on making this video because I posted a blog entry on this removable piece of scenery that my friend Eric Van Nice made recently for the narrow gauge area. And he had the clever idea of screwing the building down to the base of the scenery so that you could grab onto the building as a way of moving it on and off of the layout. I have a staging yard underneath this particular part of the scenery, so I wanted to be able to remove it if I needed to clean the tracks in the staging area or pull out a derailment, something like that. I noticed there was a narrow gauge locomotive there in the corner. We might as well run that since we're all rail fans here, right? After all, there is an empty gondola there waiting to be picked up at what will one day be a nice mine scene. Three toots means we're backing up, so that's why we tooted. As my father used to say, "He who tooteth not his own horn, the same shall not be tooteth." All right, after that pleasant philosophical diversion, let's get back to removable scenery. So up in the narrow gauge realm, we have a passenger special coming through, a nice little area of scenery. And you'd never guess from looking at it that this is just temporarily stuck in there until I decide what to do permanently. If that oscillating of the rear passenger car bothers you, you're not alone. Something like 30% of narrow gauge modelers have replaced their microtrains couplers with Sargent or other types. Look at that, it just pops right out. Notice I put a little groove there in the back to clear the angle bracket that's supporting the benchwork. Now down below that scene, there's a removable access hatch, which is just a piece of extruded foam with pretty trees and landscape on it. Being a lightweight foam product, it's easy to take out. The other thing I really like about it is that this area, I really need to make it part of the city of Everett. It's just that when I built the insert, I wasn't ready. So I thought, what can I do to just temporarily landscape this area? And I thought I'd just put some rolling hills and trees in, and it'll make the layout look finished, even though actually it's just a holding place for future urban scenery. This is the big advantage of removable scenery, is that you can use it as a placeholder, and it's so easy to come back and make another one later for a different type of scene or a different era, anything you want to do. This is why I'm a big fan of removable scenery, and I decided to make this video to show you a bunch of examples of it that I have on the layout. Now over here on the left of that removable piece we just saw is a small piece hiding the inside of a one-turn dual gauge helix. And I couldn't figure out any way to have access to that without another piece of removable scenery for when we need to clean the track. You can see there I'm lifting up the previously displayed access hatch. Not the prettiest thing in the world, but it fits. It's definitely better than not having it. And then that hidden dual gauge would be staring at you. You can see the crack on the left's a little obvious, so we can move it over. There are various ways we could disguise that if we wanted to, but for the moment it looks great. This is a good time to just take a minute to show how easy it is to make these removable scenery pieces. For the trees, you start with a barbecue skewer and take a sanding disc and make the point sharp. Then you put a piece of furnace filter on it, pull the furnace filter apart, spray paint the trunk brown, and sprinkle Woodland Scenic's tree material on top of it. You can see it turns out really well. It takes me an average of about 5 minutes per tree to make one. For rocks, you take a 2-inch piece of foam, carve it with anything you like carving foam with, a steak knife or whatever, paint it with a white latex paint or an acrylic gesso, then stain the surface of the rock with a few different washes, and you have rock faces. The dirt you do with plain latex brown paint and sprinkle grass and dirt materials on top of it. And when it sets, it looks just like this. It's not the most beautiful scenery in the world, but when you're doing a lot of it, it goes quickly. Okay, now let's go across the aisle to the Bellingham Staging Yard throat and look at an example of removable scenery as a way of overcoming decision fear. This is an area where I would like in the future to put a turnout and run a track along the wall. But it's a future project, and all I wanted to do initially was get across the aisle with that drop-down bridge to the right. So the solution was to put in a hillside and wait until some future year when I install the switch in this location that we're looking at right now. So now I'll show you how easy it is to remove this piece of removable scenery. First we bring down the bridge, crawl under it, grab it, and voila! Removed. You can see it's just 2 chunks of 2-inch extruded foam carved and covered with scenery. And you can see when I stick it back, it messes up the bush a little bit, so we'll have to go and fix that up. But you'd never know that we just removed it. Now just for fun, let's go ahead and run that camera train across the scene. The GoPro camera that I'm using on the flat car has a tendency to hit on the side of the scenery sometimes, so now we're looking off to the left instead of straight ahead. But this is a nice scene to watch. It's the module that was created by Paul Scholes for his book on building scenery for model railroads. It's not removable though, so let's get back to the subject of this video. Sometimes we model railroaders put too much track into too little space, and this was the case here. I had 3 different routes all trying to take this corner. So the solution was 2 removable pieces of scenery. One is the overall top there, and the second was a shelf over the tunnel underneath. This way I have 2 tunnels and a plausible or a semi-plausible spur there with the box cars and the hopper car. I'll show you this from a different angle now. You can see the 2 tunnels going in, and I remove that tunnel, and if I need to get to the track below that flat area, I can remove that plywood right out from the fascia and clean everything up. Uh-oh, I hear a train coming. I guess we'll have to take a short break for some rail fanning. These are the new Athearn Genesis GP18s, equipped with Tsunami 2 sound decoders and bright LED headlights. I really like the headlights. Those Boeing Skybox cars you see there are on top of another removable piece of scenery, which we'll cover later. All right, now for my favorite piece of removable scenery. This is the Milwaukee Road car ferry, which served Port Angeles and Port Townsend from Seattle. I used the Walthers car barge just to save time, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun if I could make the surface of the water removable and detail the seabed underneath. This is a tugboat that my friend Bob built from a Walthers kit. The Milwaukee Road had a tugboat in the Seattle area, and he found some pictures of it and kit bashed this version. There you go, removable water. Eric Van Nice and I had a lot of fun coming up with this seabed plan. On the left is a Milwaukee boxcar that fell off the float, and on the right is a Great Northern gondola which must have fallen off too. Of course, no model of a seabed is complete without a mermaid and a couple of divers trying to steal some gold nuggets from her. Right? Looks like a log fell off the dock too. Of course, I had to keep a couple of these switch engines running just for the sound effects. Now we'll put the whole complex back together again in fast motion. There we go, tie everything down and we're back in service. One of the problems with using a basement for a model railroad is you usually have an electric service panel or two that have to be accessed. So somehow I came up with this idea of putting a forested hillside in front of the electric service. You can see how proud I am of myself. It contains about 200 fir trees that we made out of furnace filter. There is also an electric timer for the outdoor lights. When the removable part is gone, I have access to the back of the shelf where there are some tracks on the lower level for industries and the main line, which is more easily cleaned from up top like this. The section behind the hopper cars is also removable, and behind it is a 2-track Mount Vernon staging yard. It's complicated to remove, so I won't show you it in this particular video. Now we'll just put it all back together at high speed. And take a slower look at how well it turned out. You can find the transitions from the removable scenery to the permanent scenery, but overall I'm satisfied with this. And people had no idea when they see that big forest that the whole thing is removable. Now to the right of that scene is a stretch of main line between Burrlington and Mount Vernon and Everett, which is simply built on flat plywood with foam scenery inserts resting on the plywood. So if I ever want to make a station or do some other scenic treatment, all I have to do is remove these pieces of scenery and work on them at the workbench. This is the bridge over the Stillaguamish River, and on the other side is yet another little forest up against the backdrop, although that retaining wall to the right of it is something that's permanently mounted since it has a track on top of it. Then coming around further to the south, to the right, we have an area with a 2-track staging yard behind it, and Dave Enger came up with the idea of a removable retaining wall so that if we need to get in there for derailment purposes or cleaning track, it's not too hard to do. I'm just demonstrating that you actually can take the piece out and then look in there and see the track underneath. Now to the right of that, we have the double tunnel that I showed you earlier in the video. This is from the other side, and it ends with a rock cliff. We had to build something this weird looking because we had one of the turnouts of the Delta Y, which is a very important turnout on the main line. We needed to be able to have access to those points inside the tunnel. So Eric Van Nice came up with the idea of putting a hole in the rock work and this removable section that I showed you earlier. This is just what it looks like from the other side. Those two curved ducts in the ceiling tell you there's a furnace behind the layout here. So in order to work on the furnace, which only happens every 10 or 15 years, I put rail joiners in all 7 of the yard tracks and built this little section of the yard on a removable section of bench work. And you can see on the right-hand side there another crack in the roadbed, and I have part of it hidden by that little ice house kit. And that, of course, is a removable building, which is the subject of some other video, all the removable buildings and bridges that we have. So to close out this brief tour of removable scenery on the Burrlington Northern Railroad, here's a shot of a ballroom dance scene that I created because my wife and I enjoy dancing so much. And I just put the whole thing on a dance floor, and for the moment it's parked in the Everett station. But in the future, who knows? Maybe we'll move the dance floor to a different location. Well, that's all for now. I hope I've encouraged you to consider removable scenery for your layout. In the meantime, this is your host, Burr Stewart, wishing you much fun with trains.